A priest was once giving a message, sermon, or actually it was a message, it was a talk, and everyone was enjoying the good talk. But then he looked at his watch, and an hour had passed, and he said, "All glory and honor to the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit," and finished and was done. And he didn't say anything else. He just stopped midway. Do you know what he was talking about? He was talking about silence. And he had gone on for an hour. And the thing about talking about silence is that it's kind of paradoxical, right? You can't talk about silence that much. So hopefully I won't have a long message today like this priest. But before we go further into talking about the importance of silence in the Orthodox framework, we have to realize that there are so much writings on the importance of this. And one that I want to call to your attention. There's a book that is a very important spiritual book in the life of the Orthodox Church, and it's called The Ladder of Divine Ascent. It's by St. John Climacus. It was written around 600 AD. St. John Climacus wrote 30 steps in how do you become closer to Christ. How do we climb in our pursuit of the divine perfection that God calls us to? Why 30 steps? 30 steps because that was the age in which Christ started his ministry. And this book has been a book that all Rambachans, monks of all different denominations or jurisdictions of the Orthodox Church have been using in order to grow in the likeness and reflection of Christ as we're called to do. And the thing is, the step 11 is what I want to talk about today. Step 11 is on talkativeness and silence. St. John Climacus says, talkativeness is the throne of vanity in which we are showing off. Talkativeness is a sign of ignorance. What's ignorance? The kids? Ignorance is not knowing. But then thinking that you're knowing. St. John goes on and writes, intelligent silence is the mother of prayer, freedom from bondage, custodian of zeal, and the guard on our thoughts. There are two opposite actions that we could take. Talk too much or be silent. Which is the better virtue? Obviously, silence is the better virtue. As another father of the church, Archimandrite Basilios, he writes, because the more we speak, the less we listen. Let me say that again. The more we speak, the less we listen. The more we hear the sound of our own voice, the more we drown out the silent voice of our conscience. We talk, and keep talking in order for what? For us not to be confronted with our own conscience, with our own thoughts, the thoughts that convict us that we're doing something wrong, or that we should change our lives, or that we should be closer to Christ. In today's gospel, we see this point drawn out. St. Luke chapter 18, verse 18 to 27, we hear about a young, rich man who comes to question Jesus Christ. And do you know what happens when the rich young man questioned Jesus Christ? The rich young man became sorrowful. He became sorrowful. Jesus confronted the man and revealed that this rich young man loved money more than God. And being struck by this revelation, this rich young man became sorrowful. When we are in a moment of silence, when we sit in that silent moment, you know what happens to us? We become just like that rich young man. Because when we are in that silent moment, when we turn off the television, when we turn off the music, when we turn off all the talking, and we just sit in that silence, you know what happens? We are confronted with our God and our Creator, just like that rich young man confronted Jesus Christ. And in confronting the God who gives us everything, the God who is there and present in every moment, when we are in front of Him, and we look and we hear and we just be there in that time, we find ourselves sorrowful. We find ourselves sorrowful because of the fact that He convicts our hearts. But think about the opposite. What happens when we talk too much? We talk a lot because we're afraid of silence. We're afraid of confronting our inner thoughts and God's message to us. But how many of us have ever spent hours happily chatting away? Maybe you went to a friend's house. Maybe it's here in the lunch hall. You talk, and you're having a good time talking. And you know what happens after we talk? You walk away from the talk, and what happens? You just feel this emptiness inside of you. You feel empty and overloaded with pointless information because we've talked. I'm not saying I don't want to come to the hall and say no one talking. No. But the idea is that the opposite of silence brings us to a point of being unfulfilled. And the thing about silence is it fills us so much that we become sorrowful and we become changed by that moment. We have to value silence. We have to realize that there's power in being silent. Jesus Christ was silent. Do you know when He was silent? He was silent at His own trial when He probably should have spoken, right? But in that silence, there was a power. The silence of Jesus Christ was prophesied by Isaiah. When Isaiah said in Isaiah chapter 53, verse 7, like sheep being led to the slaughter, or a lamb that is silent before the shears, He did not open His mouth. Are sheep and lambs silent? Some are. But farmers and those who raise cattle will tell you that sheep, I had to Google it and see, are lambs really silent? I think I can, see commercials of them, not speaking, but making noise. And I think sheep would make noise, and they do make noise. But like a sheep that is led to the slaughter and a lamb that is silent before the shears, Christ was a unique one. And He calls us to do the same thing. To find those moments of being silent. So we need to realize that power. We need to learn to live in moderation. To talk when we need to talk. And to listen when we need to listen. To speak when needed. And to be silent when needed. This is the part where I think this is the most practical part of this message. And I hope, the whole thing is practical. But I hope this part especially sticks with you. Have you ever gotten angry and felt the immediate need to speak, rather yell and tell the other person why you're hurt and maybe even hurt them by speaking? Think about that moment. We all have been in that moment when we get so angry and all we want to do is kind of what I would say verbal diarrhea. We just spit out everything at that person and yell at them and yell. And all of that, what happens? Nothing good. Nothing good happens in that moment. Nothing that you say in that time is helpful for resolving the conflict or your issue. Do you know what it does? It leaves us feeling empty and hurting those around us. In those moments, silence can save friendships, and most importantly, it can save marriages. My brothers and sisters, let us learn to be silent, to quiet our minds, and dwell in our hearts when we need to especially. When you're angry, be silent. The things that you say when you're angry, you can't take back. When you calm down and you're able to speak well, speak what is needed. Let us learn how to be silent. Let us learn to be in the presence of Christ and to find that those moments, like the rich young man, to go to Christ and evaluate where we are in our lives in that silent moment. Let us learn how to be silent, that we will be able to ascend another rung on the ladder of divine ascent. Let us learn. All glory and honor to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.